is Andrea from Intuitive Body Lab, and welcome to today's audio session. So today we're going to dive deep into carbohydrates, and I'm going to try to make this as interesting as possible because it is a little bit boring, I guess. We're just talking about what carbohydrates are, how they are important for the body, and a little bit more into is important about carbohydrates in the body, including things like the different types of fibers that are in carbohydrate sources. So I'm going to try to break it down into easy to understand chunks so that you can feel confident about incorporating carbohydrates into your diet. But the basics on carbohydrates is that they are a macronutrient, and a macronutrient means that they are an energy source for the body that is required in the most amounts. So macronutrients include carbohydrates, fats, and protein. Now, carbohydrates break down into glucose in the body, and the body will use glucose for fuel, for energy, which many of us know that glucose is one of the main fuel sources for the body's energy. Now, there are different types of carbohydrates, and I think this is really important to know because a lot of people kind of put all carbohydrates into the same basket, and they usually have a bias on carbohydrates and label them as bad. But carbohydrates have different types, including simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, and then within those carbohydrates there are different types of fibers. So simple carbohydrates are quickly digested and they can provide an immediate energy source for the body. So this can be of use and benefit for some, but for others it means that that quickly digested carbohydrate is giving some sort of blood sugar spike. And the examples of these simple carbohydrates include things like your table sugar, honey, fruit juices, lollies. Those type of simple carbohydrates we think of as high sugar. Usually they are processed foods, but simple carbohydrates can be found also in different whole foods like fruits and milks, but it's alongside other carbohydrates as well, include fats and proteins. And then we have complex carbohydrates, and complex carbohydrates are basically made up of longer chains of sugar molecules, and then they are digested in the body a little bit slower than simple carbohydrates, and then therefore they provide a sustained source of energy. And within complex carbohydrates you also have the fiber component, which also supports that slower digestion of the complex carbohydrates, reducing the blood sugar spike. And the types of carbohydrates, or complex carbohydrates, comes from foods such as whole grains, your legumes, starchy vegetables like your sweet potatoes. And then of course we have the fiber component of these carbohydrates. And whilst the fiber is not a carbohydrate as such, it is not an energy source for the body, fiber is crucial for gut health and supports digestion, and is, as I said, really important for slowing down the absorption of those carbohydrates and therefore supporting regulated blood sugar levels. And fiber is contained in foods like your vegetables and fruits and whole grains, nuts and seeds. So within that fiber component we also have different types of fiber, and that includes soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. And soluble fiber is slower, it slows digestion, which is what I refer to when I say that it helps to stabilize that blood sugar levels. That benefit comes from the soluble fiber. It also can be supportive for those that are looking at reducing LDL cholesterol. They're supporting healthy cholesterol levels, supporting healthy bowel motion, and this benefit comes from soluble fiber found in foods such as oats and beans and lentils, apples and their skins, and some types of citrus fruits. And then you have insoluble fiber. So this type of fiber essentially doesn't dissolve in water, therefore it adds bulk to your stool and it helps to maintain regular bowel movement. And with doing that, it also supports your gut health and helps to keep a nice healthy motility digestive tract. And foods with insoluble fiber include, again, whole grains, nuts and seeds, vegetables like carrots and zucchini. And as you can tell, you have these soluble fiber and then insoluble fiber usually together in different types of foods, and not always, but usually it's combined with these different types of foods along with the carbohydrates. So what is the role of carbohydrates in your diet? As I mentioned, carbohydrates are a energy source for the body, and they are required for high intensity activity such as exercise, but also day-to-day functioning of your brain. So the requirement of your brain to focus requires a certain level of carbohydrates. And also the energy production that is produced from the carbohydrates, as I mentioned, there is a quick release of foods coming from simple carbohydrates and slower release coming from complex carbohydrates. This can be used really intentionally, and it usually is for people that do types of endurance training and they use simple carbohydrates to get that quick energy source. Whereas day-to-day people, if you're not involved in endurance, we try to focus on those complex carbohydrates, which are going to give you a sustained energy source. Carbohydrates are also really important for balancing blood sugar because the complex carbohydrates, are paired with different types of fibers, but then also if you're pairing it with protein and fat, it can help to support digestion and reduce blood sugar spikes from any other carbohydrates that can cause a higher blood sugar level. Carbohydrates are also really important for supporting cortisol regulation and serotonin production, so helping to support stress and sleep and hormones overall, I think is really underrated, a benefit from carbohydrates. And then again, carbohydrates are supportive for gut health because they have that fiber component. They feed gut microbes, improve motility, reduce inflammation, and support overall immunity. So when you're choosing carbohydrates to include into your diet, you want to look at what you're requiring those carbohydrates for. And usually day-to-day people, we're looking for those complex carbohydrates because we want a sustained energy release from them. We want to support our hormone production. We want to support our bowel motility. And this comes from complex carbohydrates. Is there a place for simple carbohydrates? Absolutely. Having a small amount in our diet is generally not going to be harmful, but if you're aiming to get your carbohydrate goal day to day in terms of balancing your macronutrients, really aiming for your complex carbohydrates, which, as I mentioned, come from your whole grains, your fruits and vegetables, your legumes, your nuts and seeds. These provide that long-lasting energy with also those essential nutrients and also support satiety. And then with the simple carbohydrates and the refined carbohydrates, I believe that we can always have a little wiggle room for these foods in our diet. They may even be useful if you're looking at endurance training, but generally these are processed which are removing the fiber and the nutrients from them, and they include things like the sweets, the sugars, the white bread, pastries, cereals, those types of things. And whilst they might provide a quick energy boost, they are often followed by a crash in energy and a low in nutritional value. So aim for a variety of whole foods, carbohydrates usually throughout the day, incorporate lots of colourful fruits and vegetables, whole grains and legumes, and then use those refined carbohydrates sparingly. So carbohydrates are a beneficial and important macronutrient that is essential for energy, for gut health and regulating hormones. So do not be afraid of carbohydrates. It's about finding the right ones for you and making sure you have a level of balance of carbohydrates in your diet. So I encourage you to incorporate more or different types of carbohydrates in your diet to get more variety, to include those different types of fibers, and don't just be afraid of all carbohydrates. Really start to look at what carbohydrates you're consuming in your diet, how you can get more variety to meet your carbohydrate goals. That is it from me today. Hopefully you've taken something from this, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.